All right. We're going to do a webinar. This is good stuff.
What's going
What's
on,
up,
Quinny?
everybody? How you doing, Dave? Good to see you, brother.
I'm doing great, brother. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks. Well, we got to give a couple of minutes for people to log in here, Dave. But we got right now we got 68 people. There are 100 and what do we say, like 180 people registered for this. Jeez,
Yeah, we're
that's
just
fantastic.
approaching 200. So yeah, we'll give it another minute or so. We want to make sure that we get this thing started on time. Yeah, it looks like it's filling up. And if some people are late, that's cool. No worries at all. We're recording this, so there's probably going to be an opportunity to watch it down the road. If we can repost it to our channel, we'll see. But yeah, we'll give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll kick it off.
I love it.
Awesome. Yep, it's filling up.
Love it. For everybody that's coming in, man, thank you guys for coming into this. This is exciting for us.
Yeah,
So,
we're really excited to get this kicked off here. And it's really cool to see the support, the amount of people that are jumping in here. And I think this is going to be a really, really cool thing that we're doing moving forward here. And we'll talk about that when we get it started as to, kind of what this is all about and why we're doing it, and how I think it's going to benefit the industry and the community. So looking forward to it, and also to partner up with the Real Rescue, Quinny, who's also one of our SR3 rescue concepts instructors. So I say we just go ahead and kick it off, brother.
Man, I'm totally ready when you are. If everybody else is ready out there, I'll tell you what, if you guys don't mind, everybody that's out there, just drop into, there's a questions and whatnot down in somewhere in your chat box. If you guys could just write where you're coming from, like where you're at, the agency you might be working for, just give us a little information about you. Yeah, we'd love to hear, just to kind of see where everybody's coming from. We're like pumped. Almost 200 people registered for this, so it's very exciting for us. But so to really kick us off, I want to first say thank you guys for coming in. This is our first webinar, and we're going to provide some killer training. So myself, as one of the SR3 instructors, I also run the Real Rescue podcast, and we decided to come together because of everything that goes on around the world. I'm like beyond excited about doing this with you guys today. So it's going to be great. Dave, you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just say, one of the things that kind of precipitated this is we realized that, it's amazing to do classes at conferences, and it's amazing for us to be able to, as a training company, go to an organization and provide training in person. But there's a whole lot of folks that don't have the ability to do either of those options. So we just realized that this is a really good way to provide training, some sort of training that anybody can participate in. So whether it's free or you sign up for a really small fee that's totally reasonable, there's a lot of folks out there that just don't have the opportunity to get training. So we kind of realized that there was an opportunity to provide that, and we're super excited. So you can look forward to us posting jointly, and then even some courses are going to be individual between SR3 and the Real Rescue, but a whole lot of content, mainly on STAR operations, but there's going to be some other types of content as well. So when it comes to the STAR community, I mean, Hoist, NVG, Swiftwater, open water, vessel, I'm really excited because we're going to do some courses specifically for the pilots. We have a really, really strong group of certified flight instructors that provide phenomenal instruction from SR3 whenever we do any type of our helicopter training. So we're going to have some very specific training for pilots, which is something that I think there's a great need for in the industry. So look forward to that, and just keep an eye out, because there's going to be a lot of content, and that's kind of the whole reason we're here. So with that being said, I say let's go ahead and kick it off. And our email addresses are down there at the bottom, and you guys feel free to reach out to us. But so for introductions here really quick, so my name is Dave Cowan. I am currently the Director of Operations and a certified flight instructor for SR3 Rescue Concepts. For anybody that doesn't know SR3, we are a training company. We're one of a few training companies out there. And we provide mainly helicopter search and rescue training. We do a lot of other things as well. So if you're interested, go to sr3rescue.com and check out our website. There's a list of all the services we provide and the training. So if you're interested, check out the website, or you can send us an email as well to info at that same web address. But for me personally, I retired from Las Vegas Metro Police in 2020 as a sergeant, did a little over 20 years with that agency. Absolutely love those men and women, and spent about 2/3 of my career in the air support unit as a pilot, officer, and then a sergeant as well. So retired as a sergeant, ran about half of that unit when I retired. And basically I did primary flight training, was a rescue pilot. I did hoist rescue, short haul, flew patrol, surveillance, tactical missions with SWAT and K9. We did all of our own internal training, so all that stuff was done in-house. So I'm a rotorcraft CFI, an MVG instructor, stood up our Part 133 program with Las Vegas Metro Police, and now, again, one of the CFIs for SR3. So I get to travel all over the place and provide the same level of instruction, mainly with SAR stuff, but tactical stuff as well. And that's kind of my role here. So I'm just super stoked to be here and to work alongside you, Quinny.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it. So for those that don't know me, my name is Jason Quinn. I am the host of the Rail Rescue Podcast. Yes, I had to throw that in there, like, but I'm also one of the SR3 instructors here that I get to work alongside with Dave. It's been an amazing ride, and this opportunity here has come up, and we're taking full advantage of it. Little background about me. So I have been in helicopter rescue for over 20 years. I've been operational for the majority of that. Currently, I've flown on 12 different aircrafts in 8 different countries. So it has been a blast. I've been around the world a couple times. I've seen some amazing things that it has come by, good, bad, and indifferent. Some things I agree with, some things I don't. But it's getting knowledge out there, and when what people are doing for rescue, it never ceases to amaze me. Hence the podcast side, where I just listen to the guys do their stories, and it blows me away at the stuff that guys are doing out there, guys and girls that are doing out there, and it's amazing. So I'm excited to get into this with you guys.
Awesome. So really quickly, we had a disclaimer that some of you might have seen when you registered, and I'm not going to read this thing, but the point that I want to make with this, that Quinny and I want to make, is that the stuff that we're going to talk about carries a lot of risk. Obviously, we're talking about helicopter hoist operations. So what we're basically telling you is, hey, don't, especially if you have no experience in this, don't take what you heard during a webinar, go out and try to apply it with no actual training, because there is obviously a huge potential for injury or even death. So we had to put this out there. Feel free to read the full disclaimer if you want, but the point is, this is for informational purposes only. It's not a substitute for actual in-person live training. So again, SR3, we are a training company. We would be more than happy to come out and provide that training. I always say, and I'll say it at the end of this thing again, just go get good training. We're not the only option out there. There's other companies that provide phenomenal training as well, but just get good training. And most importantly, don't take a snippet of this and go out and try to apply it if you don't know what you're doing. So we just want to make sure everybody understands that. Informational purposes only. So why are we here? This is essentially going to be on hoisting or winching emergency procedures specific to rotation and spin. So we teach a whole variety of emergency procedures when it comes to hoisting, and I'll let Quinny touch on that in the next slide. But what I want to point out to everybody is it's a condensed version of a much more detailed class that we have on just this one specific topic. So we're going to be covering the basics. So without stretching this out to a 2 or 3 hour course, we want to keep this a little over an hour to be mindful of everybody's time. So just keep that in mind. We can get much more detailed with this topic, but we're going to keep it as fairly the basics essentially. So for a lot of you that are actively doing this, it's going to be a bit of a refresher, which is great. If you're new to hoisting, hopefully this will provide some really good insightful material that'll help you out. But again, it's going to be a fairly basic course, so we just want to point that out, that our actual ones are much more detailed. So just keep that in mind. Also, when it comes to this webinar, the participants' video and audio is not active. That's by design. You can imagine if we had 1,000 people in here, it would be absolutely ridiculous. If you've ever been in a Zoom meeting with more than 10 or 15 people, it can get a little crazy. So you're not displaying your own video and you don't have your audio active for obvious reasons, but you do have the ability to interact with us. So you can submit questions. We're going to see that. We have a moderator that's helping us out. So if we see questions, we're going to answer them at the end. But if we see something that is really worth bringing up in the middle of it, we're going to go ahead and address it. We're going to have some interactive things that you can provide some information. We have some polls where it's going to be really quick. We're going to open it up, ask a question, let you guys answer. We'll close it out and kind of see the results of the poll, which will be interesting. And then we have some videos that we're going to show as well. So we encourage you guys to interact with us and especially ask some questions. And we'll get to that at the end.
For sure. So today we're going to go over the rotation or spin, a common problem that everybody has. Now, that is just one EP that we go over in all of our classes. So as you see here, we've got 19 that we consider as an emergency procedure, some sort of an emergency procedure while you're hoisting or in hoisting evolutions. Obviously, with a full class, we would go over a whole lot more of these, and you're actually going to see quite a few of these in the future. But like I said, today, rotation and spin. So this is the asterisks. All right. So I stole this from the podcast itself. And in some of the asterisks episodes, a lot of it is either information, just history, or like backside stories. As a matter of fact, I just released one not too long ago, or actually earlier this week with the Navy guys. So that was all about their training and what they did and get the in-depth side of things. So outside of the actual rescue side, we have the asterisks. All right, that's that little star that everybody, you know, the fine print. Yeah, that's what this is. All right. So although the presentation here, or I'm sorry, throughout the presentation here, there's going to be actual footage of training and actual footage of hoisting emergencies, the spin specifically. All right. Our job here is to look at that and critique, learn from it. So there's a big difference between critiquing and criticizing. We are not here to criticize anybody or anything that they've done. We were not in the aircraft and we were not on scene. So we're here to learn from it and say, what can we do different to prevent that, our agency or our helicopter crew from doing that, okay? Hindsight being 2020, we all know you look back at something, you can Monday morning quarterback it, which we all do all the time, be like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. And then we go in and start criticizing somebody. Again, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to learn, all right? Create the awareness throughout the industry. That is our goal with this webinar and the many more to come.
All right, so kind of the overall for spin, what is it? Why are we here? So generally speaking, the whole point of this is to understand that loads can become unstable beneath the aircraft. Helicopters create a tremendous amount of rotor wash, and mainly because of the rotor wash, but also some other factors that can provide enough of an effect on a load to create instability. So that's essentially what we're going to be talking about. We're going to break all this stuff down, but it's really important to point out that with proper procedures and training, it can be avoided. And you're going to see near the middle of this, we're going to break it down into basically prevention and then what do you do if it actually happens, the response to it, right? But the one thing that I always talk about when we teach this in the classroom and then at conferences is, why are we still seeing this happening? If you think about it, usually, I mean, geez, at least once or twice a year, you'll see a social media post of a helicopter doing a hoist operation, and you'll see a load. Usually it's a litter that's just spinning out of control, and you're just, thinking, man, what happened? How did these folks end up in this situation? And again, being respectful and keeping in mind that we're just here to all get better, because I think we've all been in situations where, things went sideways and they could have went better. And absolutely, I've been in plenty of those myself, but why are we still seeing these videos when, I mean, almost all of these are completely preventable. And then once they do occur, again, there's a response that can get these loads under control. So that's really the reason why when Quinny and I decided to do this course, and we thought, when we launched a webinar series, we want to do a free one. What's the most, valuable thing that we could probably do? Well, let's do one on spin. Because I mean, if you think about it, all of us, if we're doing our jobs right, we should be able to eliminate these videos that are going viral every year. So that's essentially why we're here, and hopefully some of the information that we provide in this course will be helpful to everybody that's attending, and hopefully someday we won't see this happening anymore.
Here's open.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Quinny.
I said, here's open.
Yeah. All right, so with this, as far as the actual hoisting emergency procedures, one of the things I wanted to touch on is it is important. You have to follow your rotorcraft flight manual for all of the emergency procedures. And then in addition, if you have established company procedures or unit procedures, whatever you want to call it, if you have SOPs that you need to follow, if what we teach slightly deviates from that, and the one thing that I always do say is, if you get training from us or, another company or another person, hoisting is hoisting. Generally, we should all be doing this about the same. You're going to find minor differences and inconsistencies with, maybe hand signals and procedures and verbiage and things of that nature. But if we're all doing this right, we should all be generally doing this about the same. So the caveat is, if there are minor differences, well, by all means, follow your company procedures. We're not here to change what you're doing. We're just providing information. But the one thing I will touch on is with the rotorcraft flight manual, you do have to follow the rotorcraft flight manual for emergency procedures. However, keep in mind that if you do have an active spin that is just completely out of control, that now creates a situation that by definition, especially in the United States, the FAA will allow you to deviate from the flight manual in the event of an emergency. So the example I always give is in the Bell 407, it basically says in the flight manual supplement that you're not supposed to go in forward flight by definition with an external live load. So, it's been brought up in some of our training classes in the 407 where they say, well, geez, if I get this uncontrollable spin, somehow tagline breaks, the RFM prevents me from going into forward flight. Well, if you've created or you're now thrown into this emergency, you can legally deviate from it to respond to and control the emergency. But outside of that, just keep in mind, you need to follow whatever is in your flight manual and your company procedures.
All right, guys. So we're going to take our first poll that you guys get to take. It's going to be super fun. So Dave's going to load it up right now. And the question is going to be, how many people out there have ever had an actual spin emergency? That is operational, not just training, but hey, you know what? Let's throw it in training as well. So an actual spin, like not planned, emergency. Hit it.
We put in there, I do not have experience in hoist operations, just to cover everybody that does not.
Because we like all you guys. We appreciate everybody that's attending with us. So that's what's up.
And I'd be really surprised if this wasn't at least half of the people here. We'll give it a few more seconds. We're at about 3/4 of you have voted, so that's awesome. But yeah, I think if you've done this for any amount of time, at some point you've probably gotten into a situation where the load was maybe not spinning, but became unstable when it was unexpected. And especially with hoisting or even long line. I know I've done a lot of long line stuff. And if you get something that's kind of shaped weird, like I've flown solar panels before, and it's like, man, you get to that certain speed and all of a sudden the thing just starts moving all over the place. And you're like, okay, that's not going to work. Let me slow down. But looks like we got almost everybody's voted. So give it a couple more seconds and I'm going to close this out. All right, we'll go ahead and close it out and we'll see the results. So yeah, about half. So 47%. Nice. Wow. Yeah. And that's actually awesome.
That is awesome.
Of the people don't have experience in hoist operations. Well, welcome to the class. That's really, really cool that we've got this many people that are actually attending. Awesome.
I'm actually, I'm kind of curious with everybody that says they don't have hoist experience. Type in the chat for us and just let us know, like, are you guys looking to get experience in this, or is this something that your company might be looking for to get a hoist, or are you looking to get into some sort of rescue? So if you don't mind, punch in the chat and let us know that. That'd be awesome. Everybody else that had the spin, awesome. And I hope you guys get out of it. And if you didn't, well, you're about to learn how to right now.
All right, so as far as the hoist emergency procedure itself, so at SR3, we, as a part of the standard training programs, we provide information and handouts on a lot of the material, but a lot of it is specific to the EPs. So this is an example of just a basic version of what one of the EP handouts would look like as like reference material. So they're very efficient and compact. So in this one, you can see this one covers rotation and spin, and all of the EP procedures have a breakdown of the description and then the procedure. So we're going to break down the procedure, but essentially, what is the description? Well, it's the load and the personnel on the hook get into an uncontrollable spin under the aircraft. And I want to point out there's a difference between rotation and spin. Rotation is something that happens. It's not an emergency. A hook rider might come up and maybe they've got a med pack or something, or they've leaned back too far. Their body positioning isn't correct, especially when people are learning, and they might have a little bit of a slow rotation. That can be controlled, and we're going to get into that stuff with future classes. But that's not a spin. That's not an emergency procedure. Spin is like, hey, this thing is rapidly rotating, and now it needs to be brought under control. So that's what we're talking about. But the basic procedure is listed here, and we're going to break it down. But the biggest thing is the hoist operator has to notify the pilot, and we'll explain that in detail here in a second, why the hoist operator can attempt to basically put the load back on the deck or in the water if it's safe to do so. If it's not safe to do so, or we need to, the hoist operator can advise the pilot, hey, we're clear of obstacles, request forward flight. We're looking for about 20 to 30 knots of forward airspeed. In most cases, that'll mitigate the spin or a pendulum pretty quickly. And then if there's people on the hook, they can actually use their arms and legs or their body position to counter again rotation by getting that under control. So that's the basic procedure. But if you don't have something like this with your own company or your own operation, highly recommend it. If it's not in your SOPs, you should have some sort of a reference material that when it comes to like a training day or, hey, just it's been a while, we haven't done this. It has guidance. So it needs to be written down and put in a very simple, efficient way. And this is an example of that.
So this is an example of good training, right? So what I did, this is me hoisting right here, and I went out to a platform, and what I asked for was a no tagline, lift the stretcher off the ground. You're going to hear it be called a pet bag because that's the term that we use in this company that I was flying with. So it comes off the ground. I want it to get into a spin. So it starts to get into a spin. And then you're going to see that we go into forward flight and it kills the spin. The rotor wash comes behind us. We're going to get into much more detail there in a minute. But what I want you guys to understand is that I'm trying to get it into a spin and then getting it out of the spin. Now, at the same time, when you look at this, you'll be like, well, that wasn't a terrible spin. You're right. And I'm going to go out and film this again to make it even worse so that now I can have comparisons between it. So step one from the card that Dave just had up there is I would put it back down on the ground. You got to spin, try to put it back down on the ground. If I can't, I'm going to request to go into forward flight about 15 to 20 knots, stop hoisting and let the load just get some air and drag through clean air and then stop. And you're going to see this here in a second as soon as you play its play.
And it's also important to point out, this is a training scenario, but when it comes to training, there's a few different options here, right? The most simple and basic is you sit in your briefing room or a conference room and you just have a discussion about it. You kind of roundtable it. Maybe pull out your SOPs, you review them, and you kind of verbalize the process, right? Maybe watch some videos like this. Step two of that would be you go out in the hangar, you put power in the aircraft, use some mock-ups, you put a pilot up front, you put a hoist operator in the back, you rig everything up, maybe you put the litter with a rescuer attached up there, extend the cable a little bit, and then you simulate it, you verbalize what's happening, you kind of talk through it, and then you go through that process. Again, hugely important. It always drives me nuts when pilots don't want to get involved in this. The pilot is a huge part of this process. The pilot needs to be put up front so that they can simulate their response. So, and then lastly, you go out and you actually do it for real. And that's what this video is. It's Quinny out there training this with a non-live load. And that's another thing that I will absolutely stress is like, we don't put people in here when we're doing this stuff. This is a rescue dummy or a litter that's just weighted down. So, it is totally safe and effective to do something like this if you want to make it a little bit more realistic. So I'm gonna load this up and I'm gonna play it for you.
In a good position. And taking the load and power check.
Power check's good.
Roger, okay. And I've got a little bit of let's see, we're gonna let this swing. All right, all right, here we go. So I've got a spin.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna be able to control it, so I'm gonna request forward flight.
Forward flight.
Yeah, nice and easy.
Up a little bit.
Sounds good.
And forward.
And I'm going to stop hoisting.
Roger. All right. Ground speed 10.
I'm going to let it back out just a little bit. So grab a little more dragging of air. There we go. Perfect.
The spin has been controlled.
Roger.
I'm going to bring it in.
Go ahead.
Coming in, nice and easy. Head bag is just below the aircraft. At the step. Gonna work it around the step real quick. Actually, I'm gonna leave it right there while I get an orchestra connected.
So as you guys saw, when you're going to forward flight, you want that clean air to go through the load, and that's what's going to slow it down. Again, it wasn't a crazy spin out of control, but it works even when it's crazy out of control. Get into that forward airspeed, get that clean air through the load, and it will stabilize. Just give it a minute to do its thing. So, all right. So our next poll, oh, this is going to be a good one. So for those that are out there, do you currently train in hoisting procedures at your organization? So do you go out and actually put something into a spin to see what you guys are going to do at any point in time? We're looking for this because as we go out and train and as we go out and do stuff, we want to practice our emergency procedures. And this is one that we find that a lot of people don't train or don't know how to train. So this is why we're asking. It's doing good. Let's see, we got 60%.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've encountered some places where they don't have any type of emergency procedures for spin specifically, or even some others where they just say, yeah, we don't even have a procedure in place, let alone go out and practice it, or at least discuss it maybe, quarterly or, monthly on a training day or something like that. So hugely important. And I'll talk about this here in a minute, but when it's occurring is not the time to try to figure out what do we do. So if you do train it, you have a procedure in place and everybody's familiar with it, it's pretty seamless. That's it. Looks like just about everybody's voted. We'll share the results.
Cool. Oh, nice. 48% of you guys are training. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so 35% that are not out there training, highly recommended. Like, start looking into how to implement that into your training program. And in all reality, it's relatively easy to do. So when you guys have to go do your training flights, you should have either some set aside hours of training, flight time training, or you're going to get out, you're going to go do your minimum requirements, whatever that might be. And somewhere in there, give yourself an emergency. Give yourself that, whatever that emergency is. A spin is a great one to do because that is one that people get in a lot of trouble with. So, and a lot of times what we both have seen, Dave, I'm going to speak for both of us here, but you'll see guys get into like the spin either under the aircraft as a hoist operator or as an RS, and you're like, I don't know what to do. Total helmet fire. There's no focus. So you got to have a good plan in place. So that's what we're saying.
Right, so here, a bit of a breakdown on, what is actually occurring. And I've got a really cool video that's really old, but it's a phenomenal video that'll actually show this in flight. But what you need to consider is, so first of all, one of the things that I think it's important to point out is when it comes to teaching this, sometimes it's a challenge for people to try to explain this stuff. And it's another reason why I'm really a big fan of having like flight instructors explain this, because when you start getting into helicopter aerodynamics and the principles of flight and what's actually occurring, we're really big on that. Like it's kind of not fair for me to expect Quinny or one of my hoist operator instructors or rescue specialist instructors to try to help a pilot understand, why should we face this way? Why should we not have air going into the tail rotor this way? Why should we not come in downwind? Why should we not make some abrupt maneuvers during certain phases of flight during the hoist operation? So we're really big about when we teach this. And again, this is a very basic version of this. In our other courses, we get much more in depth into this, but basically what's occurring here is when you think about a helicopter's rotor system, a byproduct of lift is this, what's referred to as the induced flow. So as the helicopter's rotor blades are turning, there's a large volume of air that's being brought in from the top, and it's being driven down through the rotor system, and it's being basically ejected down below the aircraft. So in a stationary hover, which this is a picture of here, you get a graphical representation of the induced flow. So the induced flow is basically just a downward movement of air through the rotor system, and it's a byproduct of lift being produced. The more lift that's being produced, the greater velocity of the induced flow. So if you think about it, when we teach pilots initially to fly, we are concerned about the induced flow, but we don't typically talk about it affecting an external load, because external load flying is something that happens much later in their careers. So we're more concerned about, the performance of the helicopter and, how it affects us with controllability and power requirements and things like that. So as you get further in your career now, you start thinking about what does the induced flow do to things external to the aircraft, and hoisting specifically, hoisting and long line, but hoisting because you get close enough to the aircraft where it really affects the load and can cause things like instability, specifically spin. So essentially what's happening here is it's focused. It's the maximum effect on the load is generally, now again, I hate using specific terms, because there are, I hate backing ourselves into a corner by saying it's always this, it's always that. It varies based on aircraft type. It varies based on the design of the rotor system, the size of the rotor system, the weight of the aircraft. But essentially, it's about 1 rotor disc diameter below the aircraft is where the maximum effect is seen. Anything below that, you start to basically get to where the downwash is decreasing in velocity and you're getting further away from it. So eventually, if you think about it, you get far enough away, the effects of it are not gonna do anything to the load. If you get really close to the aircraft, well, the fuselage starts to actually block the effects of the rotor wash, or change it at least. So that 1 disc diameter, which generally in most helicopters is in this kind of the 30 to 50 foot range, is most of the time when we see it. But again, that's where the maximum effect is on the load. And the picture that we have here, it's a perfect graphical representation of what that induced flow looks like. And this is directly out of the FAA's helicopter flying handbook. So any of the pilots that are out there that started, this was the book that you started. And when you take your check ride, everything that's in there refers back to this book. So that's why we have the picture in here. But if you look at the picture of the person on the load, essentially suspended below it, that 1 rotor disc diameter below the aircraft is the area that we're trying to keep the load out of when we're stationary, because that's where the maximum effect is going to be on the load. And that's where you're going to really see rotation and spin developing, right? So if we can use this to our advantage and try to not be in that situation in a hover, or if we do have to be in that situation, we're going to try to mitigate it with things like a tagline that Quinny is going to talk about here in just a couple more slides. But ideally, if when we get to that distance, we cannot have that induced flow vertical, it basically eliminates the problem, right? So if we go to the next slide here, moving forward, once we get into forward flight, and it can either be because of forward airspeed or even wind if we're stationary. And if you think about it, if I start flying forward at 20 knots on a calm day with no wind, well, I have essentially 20 knots of airspeed affecting the rotor wash. And what happens is it starts to become more horizontal. Once we get to a speed of about regularly 16 to 24 knots is when we go through a process aerodynamically of a helicopter called effective translational lift. Well, it starts to become more horizontal. And in this picture, this is exactly what starts to happen. The induced flow starts to get deflected aft, or in the direction that we're flying. If we fly sideways, it's the same thing, but it gets deflected in the opposite direction of the aircraft, right? So that keeps the load out of that kind of sweet spot, if you want to call it that. And also, if we're stationary, but we're hovering in 30 knots of wind, the rotor system in the helicopter has no idea the difference. So if we're sitting there in a hover, but in a 30 knot headwind, it's the same as if we were flying forward in 30 knots on a calm day. So you can use that to your advantage as well. But a lot of folks are not hoisting in 30, 40, 50 knot winds. So we're going to refer to the worst case scenario, which is a calm day. But if you can just get the aircraft flying in that 15 to 24 or 25 knot range, the airflow now, or the induced flow, becomes much more horizontal, and the load can literally be brought in and out of the aircraft without being affected by it. So that's what we're looking for. The next slide that I'm going to show you here, this is a visualization of it, right? And I'm going to show you this video. I love this video. I show this in all of our classes. Everybody always asks me, why don't you show the Claude Bichard videos with his Bichard recovery technique for vortex ring state? And I love those videos. They're phenomenal. They're filmed in like ultra 4K. And any of the pilots out there know exactly what I'm talking about. But the reason why I don't show those is because the Vachard recovery technique videos really don't focus on just sitting there in a hover. Like they're slowing down. As soon as they get into vortex ring state, you see this amazing graphical depiction of what the rotor wash is doing as you get into that aerodynamic phenomenon, and then they fly out of it. But it's not just them based. I met Claude Vachard a couple of months ago when I was in Europe doing some training, and I wish I would have asked him this. I need to send him an email. I was like, could you guys film that again, but for this purpose? Just sitting stationary and hovering, no wind, and just let us film in 4K what the rotor wash looks like. So this is a super old video that was probably filmed on a Betamax. If anybody knows what that is, I just probably dated myself age-wise. But you're gonna see there's smoke being generated, and you can see exactly what the rotor wash looks like. So I want you to pay attention to two things. One, he starts off stationary, and let me just say, I have no idea what this guy's flying. It's a single seat, small aircraft. I don't know that I would fly in this thing. Quinny, would you jump in there with me?
Buddy, I'd jump in this only if you were the pilot.
All right, fair enough. But anyway, all joking aside, he starts off stationary. So you can see the shape of this column of air as it's vertically descending through the rotor system. And then as soon as he goes into forward flight, around that 16 to 24 knot range, you're going to see exactly how horizontal the induced flow becomes. And it's cool, as he departs, you'll actually be able to see the tip vortices from the lift being generated from the rotor system. But I'm going to go ahead and play the video, and there's no sound to it, but it's just an amazing graphical depiction, even though the quality of the video is not the greatest. So again, if you picture, if he climbed up, another 30 to 40 feet, again, the diameter of this rotor system is very, very small. But look, right around there, he's probably about 20 knots, and then instantly, it's almost completely horizontal. That's the condition that you're trying to get into when that load is that close to the helicopter. And we'll talk about the recovery. That's the condition you're trying to get into to get the load under control.
Dave, can you play that one more time for me?
Yeah,
Please?
absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. It was black on my end, so I wanted to make sure everybody got to see it right from the beginning. Chris, did you get to see that video? I think it's Chris Bilo. Just want to jump in and make sure you guys, actually, did everybody get to see that video?
Yeah, if you didn't submit that response, and I can play it again. Okay. Yeah, everybody saw it.
Everybody's saying, yeah, fantastic. Good deal. Cool. Thanks. All right, before I get into this too much, I am seeing some questions that are coming up. I appreciate them. Jimmy, I'll come to you. I've got two of your questions written down. We'll address them right at the end because I like where you're going with some of those. So, effects of rotor wash on the patient or on the load, right? Dave said it, about 30 to 50 feet. One rotor disc below that aircraft is that really like hurricane type, eye of the hurricane spot. The most turbulent air goes in there. When that load comes up and gets into that, especially if you stop, you get that spin, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, especially if you just leave it there, right? There are things that make it worse, right? One of them is, and Dave and I both have experience in this, where you come into a canyon or something where there's a rock face or some sort of something on the side, a building, whatever is there, but it runs that rotor wash down sideways and then makes it even faster, even lower. And if you think about it like two buildings, like a wind tunnel, the wind is coming through that, it ends up accelerating a little faster through that wind tunnel. Same scenario, comes down through the rotor wash, hits the banks, the side of mountains and stuff, and then creates a wicked spin or oscillation, which makes it even worse. So we've seen a couple guys that stories have come out because of that. It's crazy. So the next one is, what if forward flight is not an immediate option? All right. Again, Dave and I have both been in scenarios where you can't fly forward. So we just briefed earlier of like, oh, if you got to spin, just fly forward. Well, what if you can't? Because you've got something in front of you. You're going to come back to a brief. You're going to end up doing a brief, and you're going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do in case of an emergency. This is what we're going to do. This is our departure, because we've got sides on each side, or like a wall in front of us, a wall to the right. We're going to come back and left or back and right, whichever way we need to do. Right? That is going to be our departure. The next is, you can always consider using a tagline. Right? Tagline is a rope, many different names. I'm going to get into that a little bit more. And or a no tagline departure. There may be some people out there that be like, oh, no tagline, what are you talking about? We're going to get into that as well. But that is an option. Again, we're talking about how to get out of it. Get up, move forward, get out of that dirty air, get into some clean air, and that load will stabilize, right? You can always consider actually going at a higher altitude. By going at that higher altitude, exactly what Dave said, that rotor wash is going to be one rotor disc below the aircraft. That's going to be the most violent. And then from there, it's going to dissipate out. And it's not going to be as bad down here. So once you get that load out, you roll out and clean it up. All right. Now, we want to try to consider getting ahead of the issue, right? So as a hoist operator, I start hoisting, load comes in, starts that spin. 1, 2, 3, and starting to go higher. I know it because I've been a hoist operator long enough that I'm going to say, hey, I need to get into forward airspeed. Okay. I know the emergency is coming, so I want to get ahead of it. Now, there's cautions with FMS limitations, which, Dave, if you don't mind, I'd like you to take this as your CFI pilot, because you know the aircraft pilots sound a little better than I do. So would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you have to be mindful of FMS limitations, but like I said earlier, in an actual emergency, you can deviate. So that's the biggest thing that I want to stress. And again, the example that I gave was in the 407. Now there's some aircraft that do have FMS limitations on forward airspeed with a live external load or an external load period. So the one thing I'll say is, first off, make sure you're familiar with them. So you need to make sure that you look at the supplement for the hoist that is included in your aircraft, and then you need to read, again, they're all different, right? So maybe you're flying a 145, maybe you're flying a 407, maybe you're flying a 412, but for pilots, I mean, you're 100% responsible as the PIC for understanding whatever the limitations are. And I think sometimes like the supplements get overlooked because you're like, hey, I'm just looking at the primary limitations of the aircraft. Well, when you look at the flight manual supplement for the hoist, there's going to be some specifics in there. And this is where you're going to find that specifically almost all the time. But again, if you're flying an aircraft that says, under normal circumstances, you cannot go into forward flight with a live load, but you have a violent spin that essentially is life-threatening to the patient or the rescuer, that will allow you to deviate. So just keep that in mind. But you have to know these things in advance. And lastly, the thing, if you don't mind, Quinny, I'll touch on this. The response must be in advance. So at SR3, we have some checklists that we use, and we have an on-scene checklist that we use prior to initiating the hoist approach. They're very streamlined, they're very quick and efficient. But one of the things that I am super passionate about in aviation, especially in SAR, is pre-briefing the emergency, which is that's the way I've always referred to it. But what I mean by that is you need to, in these specific situations, identify whatever potential emergencies can happen. And usually the three that always are going to come up is any potential for entanglement, any potential for spin, and then if you're flying either a single or a twin engine helicopter, power loss or engine failure. So when it comes to spin, we don't need you to read, off of the entire card or go through this massive procedure on what you're going to do, but it's situation specific. So like Quinny said, where I did the majority of my rescues were high altitude, very confined canyons, day and night, and it was very common for us to fly into a box canyon and have to orient the aircraft so the hoist operator had the best pick on the load to where we are nosed into terrain. So the standard up and forward does not work. So my point is, we're trying to eliminate lag time with emergencies, always. The most we can do to try to stack the deck in our favor, and I always say, like, we make our own luck. You want to try to make your own luck as much as possible, and this is one of the ways to do that. So by eliminating lag time and saying, okay, hey, Quinny, we're flying into a box canyon. When we get to the possible emergencies, and Quinny says, hey, it's going to be a double up litter extraction with the tagline. Possible emergencies are we could get a spin, either the tagline breaks or we could just get a spin. What are we going to do? So we're going to have a very brief discussion that's probably going to sound something like, from my end, okay, hey, I can't go forward. So if you want to go ahead and call me straight up and then give me a pedal turn and I'll make a departure out of the canyon. When I climb up, he's going to basically pay some cable out and try to create some distance between the load and the aircraft to get it out of that worst case scenario of the distance of the rotor wash. But my point is we've talked about it in advance. Instead of we're sitting there in a hover nosed into a terrain in a canyon at night and then the tagline breaks and the load starts spinning. And then we're like, we got to spin. What do we do? Tremendous amount of lag time to figure it out. So we've already talked about it. And then when it happens, somebody calls it out and everybody just initiates the response. And it's as quick, efficient, and rapid as it possibly can be. So you've got to pre-brief this. And again, talking about future webinars, we're going to have some really good pilot content coming up. And this is going to be one of them, like pre-briefing engine failures in twins. And then even people say, well, why should I pre-brief a power loss in a single? That's hugely critical. Like where are you you're going to put this thing down, but where are you going to put it down? What's the method going to be? There's a whole lot of that stuff. But again, talk about it in advance, have the plan, and then when it happens, you just initiate the plan. All right, and so again, we try to simplify this and we just put this whole process of spin into two categories. What do we do initially to prevent it? So prevention, and then recovery or response. So Quinny's talked about prevention, and now we're going to talk about, okay, if just something went sideways, what is the recovery? What is the response? So again, we've talked about this now more than once, but it's an EP. So action can be taken outside of the flight manual supplement and any limitations if necessary, if this is a life-threatening emergency. The biggest thing is the hoist operator needs to advise the PIC that the load is spinning. And then, as we just said, request the response as previously briefed. And again, it's most likely forward flight, but it's not always forward flight. So whatever you've briefed, just initiate that procedure now, right? Quinny's going to talk about taglines next, but if there's a tagline attached, it needs to be disconnected. So get rid of that thing because we're going to be departing at this point. And we do not want the tagline, trailing and potentially getting snagged up, even though it's going to have a device on there that will more than likely make it break free. But as a pilot, I don't want something that's, especially at any length, suspended beneath the aircraft that could create a snag hazard. That's a huge safety issue, right? The PIC needs to expedite and establish forward flight at about 20 to 30 knots. That's like a generalization, but indicated airspeed smoothly, but with purpose. The last two videos I'm going to show you at the end of this is going to show exactly what happens with a delayed pilot departure response when we get into a spin. So we need to get that. And what I always tell the pilots when I'm training them is, hey, as soon as we call this out and we ask for forward flight, get the aircraft moving. Don't initiate a hard, dump over of the nose where it creates a big power pull, a collective, and a big pedal input, and now that induces swing in the load. But it needs to be smooth, but with purpose. Get the aircraft flying forward. And then it needs to be the realm of 20 to 30 knots of indicated airspeed. Now, why do I say that? Again, because some folks will look at ground speed. Well, ground speed does not take into consideration whatever the effects of the wind are. This is what we're concerned about, is the airflow on the load to get it stable and under control, which needs to be about 20 to 30 knots. So for the non-pilot folks participating in this, the indicated airspeed on the instrument panel is telling us exactly how much air is moving across the nose of the aircraft, which is the same that's going to be moving across the load. That's what we're looking for. If I'm flying into 30 knots of headwind and I've got 30 knots of ground speed, there can be a difference between those two numbers. I just want 20 to 30 knots across the load because, like in the first video that Quinny showed, that's what's going to create the stability, right? Ideally, the load should not be closer than one rotor diameter or more until that airspeed is established and the spin is under control. So again, we don't want to keep bringing the load in, and ideally, the worst thing we can do is stop it at that roughly 30 to 50 foot one disc distance beneath the aircraft, because that's where the maximum effect of the rotor wash is on the load. So if there's terrain separation, you can lower some cable out and create distance. That's going to help as well. And then again, it's really, really useful for the pilot to initiate a climb if possible, because now we're creating some terrain relief for the hoist operator to be able to do that. And this is all stuff that you would talk about in this pre-brief, so that these are the considerations that have been looked at. And then, yeah, the last thing on there, yeah, you can pay more cable out if possible. So huge. And again, I can't say enough about talking about this before you initiate the hoist, right? Don't wait for things to go sideways to figure it out.
And that would be known as the on-scene checklist. And if you don't have an on-scene checklist, give us a call. We'll let you know what that is as well. See, we're gonna have a class on that too. We got you guys. It's just the basics. We're just getting our feet wet right now. All right. All right, so now let me talk about some taglines. So what is a tagline? There's a whole bunch of different names for tagline. U.S. Coast Guard calls it a trail line. They use like very orange, and it's very thin rope, all polypro. I'm currently using an 8mm and a 7mm line or 6mm line. So I have two of them here. I know other people are using really thin. Some people are using really thick. Bottom line is a rope, guideline, something that's connected from the ground to the load, right? We're going to stabilize that. If anybody's ever used anything in a tree or tree swing, if you hold the bottom of the tree swing, it slows down as you hold on to that line, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to attach our tagline to our load, and we're going to, optimal position is that 45-degree angle, but really from 0 to 60 degrees is what we're looking for. Anything inside the 0 to 60 is going to control that load all the way up. And you want to think about it like, imagine putting the brakes on in the car. You're holding the rope just nice and easy to have a brakes on to control the load all the way to the aircraft. Now, when you get up past 60 degrees, so 60 to 90 is absolutely worthless when it comes to a spin, because what happens is the rotor wash comes down, creates that circular air, right? And it catches that load and it spins the load, right? So if you're up, you're only going to prevent it from really swinging, which doesn't even really work there. You want to move the aircraft or move on the ground. So a little tip and trick there, all right? Start over. Load's here, helicopter's here. We're going to raise it up to here. If we start to go here, there's one of two ways to get out of it. RS walks and creates that angle, or the helicopter moves and creates that angle, right? I'm going to give you a couple stories because there are things that happen with taglines that some people have had happen, including myself, and I like to throw myself under the bus, but you want that effective angle on the tagline to maximize the stability for the load. I'll give you one more tip. It's that the guy on the ground, his job is to help the guy in the air. The guy in the air, it's his job to help the guy on the ground. And I say that because once you start moving the aircraft, if you're moving the aircraft, if you're hoisting in as well as moving the aircraft, that tagline, that rope is ripping through the guy's hands on the ground. You're going to burn his hands. I don't care what kind of gloves you have on, it's going to be hot, right? When that happens, the first thing you guy does on the ground is let's go. Now you have no more control over the load, all right? Go ahead, Dave, go to the next one.
Yeah, and honestly, that's it. It's funny, but it's not funny. But I mean, how tragic is that if you get the load unstable? Because like in my case, the pilot, I just, I initiated a movement of the aircraft and I smoked the tagline attendant's hands, and they let go. He or she let go of the rope. And that was what caused the load to start spinning. I mean, that's completely avoidable, right?
Totally. So now, as a hoist operator, your job is to communicate with the pilot. So the first thing that should be said to the pilot is like, hey, we've got a tagline or rope connected to the load. All right, so now we're going to bring in the load. We know we're connected to the ground. By the way, as a side note, per FAA rule or regulations, that's now a Class C load because a helicopter is now connected to the ground, right? Even though there's a weak link on there, which I'm going to get into in a second, you're Class C load. You're Class D when you're personnel, Class C when you're attached to the ground. Just a little side note. If you're questioning me, go look it up. All right. So the status is communication, right? So prepare to take load, taking the load, power check. We've got a tagline attached. Load is coming in. Load is stable. Load's still coming in. We're at the aircraft. Once we're at the aircraft, tagline is away, right? Terminology is big there too. You don't want connected, unconnected, or disconnected because there's too much similarity. You want it connected and away, very different terminology, so that the pilot can say, Roger, taglines away, and there should always be a repeat, another little tip and trick, right? Let's talk weak links. So what is a weak link? A weak link is a way for the tagline to break away from the load. There is a whole bunch of things that are out there. US Coast Guard uses parachute cord, which is 550 cord, gutted, which is 220 off the top of my head. I think it's 220. So either way, that's their weak link, right? They use about 4 inches and they can break away. I use a whole bunch of stuff. I use tiny line, like a nylon cord that actually SR3 has a packet of. You can buy it through their website. I've used zip ties. I've used Fastex buckles. I've used a whole bunch of stuff. It's all about controlling the load and still being able to break away. Why do you want to break away? Because it's the weak link. If you have to fly away in an emergency, engine failure, something's going on with the aircraft, and you have to break the line away, you want to be able to fly away and not be connected to the ground, right? Now, another side of it is what happens if the load gets picked up, it gets taken out, I put too much pressure on it, and now the weak link breaks unintentionally. The loads start to swing, spin. What do? We have an emergency, a hoisting emergency. We deviate from whatever flight profile we're flying, and we commence whatever it is, the corrective action to fix that emergency, right? A couple little stories that I have, like with weak links, I've broken them on purpose because the aircraft called, hey, I got to fly away. I've ditched taglines as we're flying out. So I had a case once where we had a tagline connected to the deck. As soon as we got the load up, pilot was like, we gotta go. We disconnected and tossed it immediately. One of my favorites is that I find funny, I've heard of people tying stuff to the ground or like to a stationary position on the ground. Not my personal recommendation, and here's why. I had a case once where I picked a lady up who was in a stretcher. She's going up to the aircraft, and while she's going up, the rotor wash caught the IV bag, and the IV bag dropped out and wrapped around the trail line. So now I could no longer break it because I was going to rip that and all the other medical gear out of the stretcher at 50 feet up. So I had to let it go. I put the weight bag on and they flew away with the tagline. Had that been connected to the ground, we would have created a really bad scenario and bad situation. So be careful with how you use the tagline, and again, be very, very clear as to what you're going to do. Communication has got to be very good between your pilot and your hoist operator. So, Dave, you got any stories?
So just a quick one, and this is kind of one of those things where it's a compounding bunch of issues that eventually lead up to something that could have been resulting in an accident. But one of our crews had gone out and had a really, really injured lady up in the mountains that, was critically injured. So it starts off as a day rescue and inserted, people, gear, just trying to get this person stabilized. And then they eventually came back after quite the process to keep this person who did survive. It was an amazing rescue that they did. And we had some video of it that we debriefed. Well, this is one of those things where it was expected to be, about a 45-minute rescue, and then it becomes extended. So the same crew ended up doing it, and they were within duty hour requirements and all that stuff. But, they start to get tired. The folks on the ground are tired, everybody's tired. So there's a bit of a breakdown. When they went to actually extract this lady at night on an MVG hoist, they're getting her out, tough spot, winds are picking up, everybody's working, really, really hard, and everybody's loaded up. Well, what we realized was they're doing a tagline extraction with litter. Litter's coming up. When they go to get up there, hoist operator forgets to disconnect it, and the pilot starts to fly away. And again, that was a communication breakdown. And from the pilot's perspective, I've had this happen in training, and I've had this happen on actual rescues where we briefed it, the load gets up to the door, it gets secured, they've brought it in, and then hoist operator calls for forward flight or the departure. And then I've stopped and said, just confirming, taglines away and clear. Oh, negative, standby. It's happened. They've caught me, I've caught them. So And that's what essentially happened on this, was the departure was initiated and the tagline was still attached. And the RS on the ground was actually on the radio saying, release the tagline, release the tagline, release the tagline. You know, nothing happened. They flew forward maybe 50 yards and then they were able to disconnect it. But again, that's what we're trying to prevent from happening. And for the pilots, again, if you're not waiting to hear that, or you don't have that built into your procedure, where what we teach is the hoist operator is going to say taglines away and clear, and the pilot repeats it back, copy taglines away and clear, and then I initiate the departure. It's a check and balance, and it's just trying to prevent, again, you know, you've got two people involved and you've got a weak link attached, but you know, there is a potential for things to go sideways pretty quick, you know, with tagline operations. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
So we're going to take another poll, and this poll comes up as, for those that use weak link, have you ever had a weak link break during a hoist operation?
Unexpectedly.
Or curiosity? Oh, unexpectedly. Thank you. Sorry, unexpectedly. So all of a sudden you're holding, and that could be somebody doesn't know what they're doing on the ground. It could be it got snagged on something. I mean, I've had it all happen to me. So, you know, my fault, their fault.
You know, one thing I will say too, while we're waiting for everybody to get their votes in here, something to keep in mind is, so those things, depending on where they're at, they get beat up sometimes, and especially anything that's made out of the nylon cordage. Eventually, you need to take a look at those things, because eventually that's when it's going to come time to replace it, is when it does break unexpectedly. So I actually was having I had the guys hoist me in a CMC Helitack hot seat. I think it was last year. So I rode the hook up, and they had put a tagline on the back of it, and I was like 10 feet below the skid, and it popped. And you know, no big deal. I rotated maybe a couple of times, and they just brought me up, and it was no big deal. But I laughed, because I thought, boy, of all the times, you know, I'm riding the hook, and of course the weak link's gonna break. So I was actually, you know, riding the hook, and it broke one time. So it looks like we've got just about everybody in here. We're gonna close this poll out, share the results.
Oh, wow. Oh, this is a little different than I expected. Yeah, so for the 41% that have actually had it, for the 37% that have not had it, be aware, it's going to happen at one point or another if you do this long enough. So you're gonna break a weak link. And if or you might be using something a little too strong. So be able to see if you can actually break it. That's a test you can do in the hangar. Like actually pull on the line, see if you can break. Again, you're supposed to be able to break it away. Use a weak link for a reason. So cool, good to know. All right, so let's talk about the no tagline departure. Yes, this is such a thing. So what it is you're gonna, when you get into your hover, you're gonna extend your hover at a super high, well, not super high, but you're gonna go really high. Now let's go really high. Right? Ideally, you're gonna go at least 3 rotor discs, maybe 4 rotor discs above the area that you're actually hoisting. Again, let that rotor wash dissipate below. Right? When you get the load, so hoist operator, prepare to take the load, taking the load. Once we get it off the ground, right, we're gonna stop, like hold position right there. From there, request a climb to keep that rotor, the load way below the aircraft. Once we're clear of obstacles, roll into forward flight as briefed, nice and easy. As soon as we get that clear, clean air, we're gonna bring that load right into the aircraft and then bring it right in. Again, it must be briefed. We're going to show you a video here in a second of one of our instructors doing it, Mr. Rob Monday. And it's textbook. It's exactly what you're supposed to do. Dave, you got anything else to touch on that?
I'm a huge fan of this. And again, you know, when we go back to the graphical depictions in the video that we showed you, the rotor wash, you're using the scenario that causes the spin to occur by, you know, you're avoiding the situation that causes it in the first place. So we actually do this quite a bit. In Vegas, we got to where we were doing this regularly. And, you know, again, it doesn't even have to be super high, but ideally, you know, like you said, you just want to try to create the most distance between the load and the aircraft. And the biggest thing is the hoist operator picks the load. And, you know, I love that you said, hey, power check. That's another thing for another topic for the pilot classes. Yeah. But if you're not doing a power check, and it's 2 things, power, controllability as well, right? So Those are the two things that I'm checking when you call out power check. I'm making sure that I do have the available power, and I'm making sure that I have enough, you know, most helicopters left pedal, left cyclic, right cyclic, whatever it is that I'm flying, but power and controllability. So I'm happy that you said that. But the big thing is you pick the load and you hold. You don't bring it any closer. Then the aircraft climbs. And that's what you're going to see in this video of Rob doing this. It's going to be in really tall trees. It's a phenomenally smooth pick. And it's, I mean, it's completely non-eventful with no tagline. But that's the key, is you have to keep the load away from that area that it's going to be affected. So the common mistake that we see with this is the hoist operator a lot of times is so used to just, you know, picking the load and then reeling it in that they just keep reeling it in. And then once it gets too close, that's when the spin occurs. So pick the load, hold, vertical climb, clear of obstacles, make your departure. And then once you've got that, you know, 20 to 30 knots, the load's going to be stable. You reel it in, no problem, man. It's amazing. So I'll run the video. And again, I'm a huge fan of this technique.
I am too, and it works. And the bonus part about this is that this is the same thing you're going to do if the tagline breaks or you start that spin. It's great.
Okay, ready for that. 1. Hold, ever take it up, signal weight's coming on in 2, 1. And it's clear of the deck, how's your power?
Power's good.
Good, you can start a nice easy climb.
Coming straight up.
Looking good, good speed, good position there, continue up. Continue up. Continue up. Alright, continuing in. Treetop height now, you're clear for an easy departure.
Up and forward.
Good job. Just sort of 20 knots or so on the nose there.
Ready for forward flight.
Good line.
That's
a good speed.
We're just coming off watch point southbound 1500.
Looking good.
I'll just keep it straight here, Rob, till I get him on board.
Yeah, sounds great. They're halfway in. 50 feet below. That speed is good, they're riding really nicely.
On point. Good job, Rob Monday. And that is exactly what we're looking for with that no tagline departure. So you have that long cable out, you come out of the area, roll into forward flight, and then bring it in as you're coming into clean air. It's beautiful. Well done, sir.
Yeah, it's super smooth. All right, so we've just got a few more videos, and then we'll be pretty much wrapping it up, and we're going to take your questions. So next here, so this actual spin emergency, you know, we went back and forth about whether or not to include this video. And first of all, again, back to the asterisk that Quinny mentioned at the beginning of this, we want to be respectful to the agency that's involved with this. We've spoke to these folks, and some of us even have some really positive interactions with them. Phenomenal agency. And the one thing I want to say is, again, this could happen to anybody. This is just, you know, it's one of those things. I'm actually going to show you what I, you know, kind of affectionately refer to as dirty laundry videos. The next two videos I'm going to show you are actually like us at my prior agency, just doing some training and an incident where we had a bit of a spin develop. So just, again, be respectful, keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is just kind of just break this down. It's a much more condensed version of this video, and we're just going to kind of dissect it now, pointing out the stuff that's working, that's not working, everything that we've just talked about. We're kind of going to put it together. And again, this is just a phenomenal training video. And I can't say enough that if you know, have something that doesn't go right and you're willing to share and talk about it and put it out to the industry so that other people can learn from it, man, I mean, hats off to you. That's why we're all here, is just to get better and to learn and share and grow. So just keep that in mind. All right, so with this one, it's a female, an elderly female. She's packaged in a litter. Hoist hook comes down, right? So they go to attach it. There's a tagline attendant. There's two folks kind of in the lower right. And one of the things that we did notice on here is, you know, the tagline ideally is going to be attached to one end of the litter or the other, because it's going to create more leverage if you think about it. So in this case, tagline's attached more under the center of rotation, which is in the middle of the litter underneath the hoist hook, right? It's a little deceptive when this video is being shown, because there's a news helicopter that's offset that actually does start to kind of change its position. So it's a little bit deceiving as to where everything is until the helicopter itself comes in the shot and the perspective. But initially everything's going fine. The load's under control. The tagline is somewhat effective here, like Quinny, you mentioned, especially with swing oscillation or pendulum there, right? So loads being brought up to the helicopter. So far, so good. And then pay particular attention again to the distance, where we talk about that maximum effect of the rotor wash on the actual on the litter. Right here, you're starting to see some motion, but the tagline is actually still managing this little bit of left and right. But right about there in this helicopter, you're going to start to see it starts to spin. So now it's like, okay, we've got a bit of a spin going on, but we're stationary, right? The tagline is actually still connected. So hoist operator pays a little bit of cable out, gets it a little bit lower, but it's still really in that nasty area where it's being affected by the rotor wash. The tagline is still connected, and it's tough when this video is being replayed for everybody in the webinar to see it. But there you can see the tagline is still affecting it. But then when it swings out is when it actually breaks. So now the litter really starts to get going here, and it's lowered again into that kind of worst possible distance momentarily here. Another thing I'll point out is you got to be really cautious, if you're putting your leg out there, because if your leg or your boot gets hooked up in that bridle, I mean, that could really, really seriously injure the hoist operator. And again, we're just kind of dissecting this and just pointing stuff out, talking about things. So again, we want to be respectful of these folks, but if you notice, it's lowered right into that same worst possible area while the helicopter is stationary, and then it really starts to accelerate here. The tagline has broken. And this is another example of, hey, if we pre-brief this and said, hey, as soon as we identify that we've got a spin, we're gonna already have a plan in place, and now we just execute that plan. Let's get this thing moving into forward flight. So now the call is made for forward flight. We're paying some more cable out. The load is getting further away from the aircraft, and it's going to stop here in a couple of minutes. Again, this video is actually very long, for those of you that I think just about everybody's seen it. But once, even at a slow airspeed here, you can see it's decreased significantly, the amount of spin in this load. It's almost getting down to kind of like a rotation at this point. And with just a little bit more forward airspeed, that load would stabilize and come to a stop almost, immediately, with just a little bit more speed. But at least now it's manageable enough to where they can bring it in, get it under control. Unfortunately, the lady that was in that litter sustained some pretty significant injuries, and her quality of life is pretty, affected by it, unfortunately. So, again, want to be very respectful to those folks, but it's just a really good training tool there. So Quinny, I don't know if you got anything to add to that.
Not really. The only thing I want to add is just make a decision. Make a decision to write. Right? We heard that on one of the guys that came on the podcast, and you sitting there in a hover watching something spin underneath the aircraft is not doing anything for the person on the hook or the victim on the hook. Do something. Get them back on the ground or get into forward flight. It's that simple.
Yeah, and with any critical situation or emergency, again, pre-briefing it is huge, but if you're presented with any situation, maybe it's something that it's an eventuality, something no one's even ever considered before. But the big thing is just identify the priorities and then just handle those priorities in order of what's most important, But you can't say enough about pre-briefing these things so that you just respond. Right. So these last two videos that I'm going to show are the same exact hoist, but this is actually us flying in the 145 with a rescue pilot in training who's in the right seat. This is actually me in the left seat with a GoPro camera with comms. And we're gonna hoist in one of our rescuers who had been out for a while because of a surgery. So was getting recertified, and it was also using one of the rescue bags that has a steerable fin, which we didn't talk about that, but that's another way that you can mitigate spin and rotation with a litter specifically. Great devices. One of the things you have to keep in mind when you're using a device like that is if it's used, properly and you're proficient with it, they work great most of the time, but they can actually induce spin and rotation if you get a little bit behind or you make a little bit of a mistake with how you're using the fin on these things. So And that was a little bit of kind of compounding what causes this to occur, right? So what it is, it's about a 100-foot hoist in an H-145, which for its rotor diameter actually has a really, really powerful downwash, this helicopter does. So the load is picked, and then at that about 50-foot range, we're gonna have a video on the inside with comms, and then I'm gonna show you the same incident from the outside film from the ground. But it's a combination of, you know, somebody that's just kind of getting back in the mix training, and then a little bit of a misuse of the fin, which gets the spin going. And then the biggest thing, why I've called this delayed departure, is from the pilot perspective here. This was a pilot that was being transitioned from Huey that we had been doing hoisting in for years to the 145. So, you know, the kind of old mentality with the Huey was, you know, you don't move anything super fast with that two-bladed rotor system. And even if you do, the Huey's a little slow to respond anyway, and he would deserve a component. But you know, so was kind of like in that mentality where, man, I just want to get this thing moving slow. So when the hoist operator calls for forward flight and we get going, if you look in the lower left-hand picture portion of the picture, you'll see like a monitor that's tilted down, and then there's a fence line next to it. Well, watch that fence line when the hoist operator calls out the spin and calls for forward flight. Just watch how slow it takes us to get this aircraft moving. And that's what I'm trying to impart upon everybody is, as a pilot, when you guys call that out, like I said earlier, it's got to be smooth but with purpose. You know, don't induce a swing by dumping the nose over, but get that aircraft moving so that we can get that load under control. And then lastly, when I show the second video from the ground, the hoist operator kept bringing the load in, which didn't help. So with a climb and a departure forward flight, now we're giving you some terrain relief so that the hoist operator can pay cable out and get that thing away. So again, you know, this was something where, you know, after it happened, we landed and we debriefed this, and it was one of those things where, like, guys, we're better than this. Like, how did this happen? Like, this should not have happened. We're all kind of scratching our heads and, you know, laughed about it. The person riding the hook was fine. But at the end of the day, I mean, again, I can't say enough about when things go sideways, share this stuff, even if it's just internally. But man, if you can go to a conference and you can say, hey guys, we're gonna show you a video. This is what happened. This is what we did. And this is how we're gonna prevent it. Man, they are absolutely invaluable. So I'll show you the first one, which is from inside the aircraft with comms.
Taking up slack, 3, 2, 1, and the litter is off, still waiting for the rescuer to come off.
Above the blue line.
And he is, okay, all right, he's coming up. He's about 30 feet. All right, we're getting a little spin, up and forward, up and forward.
Up and forward.
Keep coming, keep coming.
Yep, just start forward plate. All right, Jay, we're gonna go up and forward.
So up and forward.
We're moving.
Forward. Yep, he's spinning. Hold on. Keep coming. Keep coming. Up and forward.
We're moving forward.
Okay, copy. He's starting to slow.
Oh wow, that's a lot of spin.
Yep, got him. He's under control
He's
now.
stopped. Is he okay?
Yep. You okay?
So again, if you notice that lower left portion, you watch that fence line, boy, we just barely creeping, you know, and it's like, hey, we're gonna go up and forward, and the pilot's like, no, we're moving, and we're moving, but you know, that could have been a little bit better of a departure to get this thing moving a little bit faster, right? So again, now I'll show you the second video. Yeah, go ahead, Quinny, Jess on.
I think I was really excited when you pointed out the obvious that he was really spinning. Just gonna throw that out there, Dave.
All joking aside, I mean, that's the last thing you want to see is, you know, one of your good friends down there going in circles, you know. All right, so the last one, again, this is the same hoist, but this is from the ground. And a couple things to point out. Again, the distance that the load is affected, it's about 50 feet in the 145 was that kind of worst possible distance below the rotor system. And then, you know, just watch the slow departure. So I'll show this one here. So yeah, that was quite a bit of spin in that video. And I was surprised when we actually watched it from the ground. When I saw that video, I was like, wow, okay, he really got going. And again, you know, our agency, man, absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I could sit here on your podcast, Quinny, and I could tell war stories until the end of time about the work that I did and the work that they're currently doing. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal men and women out there doing super technical rescue. So, you know, it was kind of eye-opening for us. We're like, man, how did that happen? You know, but we broke it down. And again, I'm always keen on showing, you know, what I call the dirty laundry videos, because there's tremendous value in it. So
There is.
yeah.
And there's one more thing with that is the hoist operators has got to stop hoisting and or send them back out to get out of that run. Let that clean air come through that load. He would have stopped. He wouldn't have kept going. As they're rolling out, lower it back into that clean air and go. Works every time.
Absolutely.
So we'd like to say thank you guys for everybody out there that has come to join us. In closing, we want to say practice, practice, practice. If you are not practicing your emergency procedures, it's time to start. All right, you can get out there and just set up your scenario, do it on the last hoist, the last evolution of your day. Just get out there, do the spin, watch it, try it, see what works for you. You know what? And actually send us some videos. I would love to get some feedback from you guys out there as far as what worked, what didn't work for you guys. This is, you're going to get into a spin, you're going to get up, forward flight, it's going to work. Okay. I'm sure of it. So we want to use that ounce of prevention to kick that word. Oh, I totally screwed that up, didn't I, Dave? Sorry, guys. So an ounce of prevention is worth that pound of pain. So we're going to practice now, so when it happens in real life, it's not as bad as we think. Thank you, Ben Franklin. God, that was terrible, Dave. Gosh.
Yeah, man, no reduce, no edits either. You know, lastly, the one thing I will say is just train. You need to train, and you need to get good training. So obviously SR3 Rescue Concepts, like we would love to come train you, you know, but the one thing I always say, and I absolutely mean this, is, you know, there are other training companies out there, and everybody is going to give you phenomenal training. That's one thing that I always want to totally impart, is just get good training. And even if it's not from us, you're going to get good training, but I can't speak enough of the importance of it. Because if you've gone extended periods of time, you might be not doing the best techniques, you may be getting rusty, you might not have the best gear out there anymore. So just get good training. I can't stress enough how valuable that is. And so, you know, lastly, again, like Quinny said, we just want to say thank you to everybody. We're super stoked that we had so many people actually sign up and attend. You can get a hold of either of us at the email addresses below. I'm DCallan at sr3rescueconcepts.com. Actually, you could also email DCallan at sr3rescue.com, which is easier. And then Jason at therealrescue.com. Check out both of our websites. Follow us on social media. Quinny has a phenomenal podcast that has absolutely amazing people that share their stories, their rescues, things that have gone good, things that have gone bad. And I can't even say enough about what a huge fan I am of Quinny, what you're doing with that podcast. But again, thank you so much for attending. And we're really looking forward to doing more of these in the future with some really good content. I will say there's going to be a survey at the end, and one of the questions on there is, tell us, what would you like to see us prevent? What type of training or classes would you like to see? So encourage you, fill that out and let us know, because you know, we want to provide the best possible training for everybody. And then this is where we'll go ahead and hit some of these questions that you guys might have had. Quinny?
For sure. And I am going to plug the podcast in again, say, hey, all you guys out there that are here, if you've got a good rescue story, please reach out, because we all want to hear it. Everybody loves it. Me especially. I love hearing this stuff. So let me get to some of these questions. So we got
good one.
Let's see.
Our moderator just said, is the oscillation and spin worse on litters? Quinny?
You know what? It is, because you have that load that's extended out. The wind or the rotor wash catches that, which creates that spin that's even worse. The tighter loads, like edge and RS, is when I'm going up. If I keep myself in that tight ball, I don't spin as bad. As soon as I start flailing out and you have extra, like we're going to call it kite, like you're going to be a kite you're going to end up spinning. So yes, it does get worse with a litter or some sort of Bowman bag or whatever's on there for a patient, for sure.
Yeah, what I would say, some of the biggest things that come down to that are the surface area of the object, right? So obviously a litter has quite a bit of surface area, and then the shape of it, especially if it's asymmetrical. So we talked earlier about, like if a single rescuer comes up and you can keep in that good kind of balled up position, but then you have like a med pack or something that's extended, and now you're kind of a weird shape. So the rotor wash has the ability to really like affect different parts of you differently, and that can cause very quickly spin, swing, oscillation. Let's see what else we got. Getting a lot of questions here.
I got so Bobby, yes, this is going to be it is recorded. We can view this later if we were going to put it out. Dave's going to put it on. Actually, we could both put it on our websites for later viewing. We're not sure how long we're going to keep it up, but it'll be there for you guys at a later time for sure.
Yeah, there's actually going to be a channel that's going to be on our web hosting service, and we will be able to direct everybody back to that channel for the recorded version of this. So go ahead and watch out, because we'll post the information on how you could go back and watch this and share it. And we encourage you to do that. Hopefully you got something out of this today. So please, we'll post the information on how to get to that channel and watch the recorded version of this. It's going to be free still. So yeah, look for that info, and we encourage you to share it with other people as well.
I got a question, Mr. Steph Mayer. What about lowering the load? Dave, you want to take this one?
What is it? What about lowering the load?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, I'll jump on this because I know exactly what you're talking about, Steph. So if you're lowering the load into the rotor wash, right, you're going out of the helicopter, you haven't started that spin yet. So you're underneath the belly of the plane. So that wind, the rotor wash hasn't quite hit that. Once you get into it, you're going through it. So once you get through it, it dissipates below, and you shouldn't have an issue going with an out or sending the load, inserting the load down.
Yeah,
I say out because
the biggest thing where you see that creating an issue is sometimes where, say, maybe you're going in a really tight spot and you start lowering the load out, and it's a static hoist, meaning that the helicopter is stationary. Another huge topic that we could spend a long time talking about is, static versus dynamic hoisting, where dynamic meaning the aircraft is in some sort of flight, and static meaning we're stationary. So statically, we're sitting there in the hover, and maybe the load starts being sent, and then we stop it, and maybe we're repositioning and maneuvering the aircraft, but we hold it in that rotor wash on the way out. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think of the videos that we've watched. If you put it in that worst possible spot, it's going to become affected by the rotor wash. So in or out, right?
Yeah. Got another one here from Jimmy. Let's see. How do you remain on the top of the target when going into forward flight? And are there any specific instances where you are required to static hoist? There are a whole bunch. So let's talk about the hoisting dynamic versus static right now, right? It's going to be based on your scenario. We like to teach actually both, so you have that option. As far as like getting over the top of the target, you're always going to stop into a hover, do your hoist, and as you're picking up, that's when you're either moving into forward flight or you're going to stay there until you get all the way up. Again, that's the brief we get into. That's much deeper into training, but the scenario based. So you can move after you have the load clear of obstacles, or if the load is riding fine, stay right there. Again, I've done both on rescues live and on training. So
yeah, I'm a big fan of dynamic hoisting. I mean, you're utilizing all of the positive effects of being in forward flight generally, but it could be flight in any direction really. But not only for the load, but for the aircraft. Like I always ask pilots when this debate comes up, there's some people that feel very strongly about static versus dynamic, and the people that say, I'm not a fan of being in flight with a live load. But one of the things I always ask is, hey, would you rather have an aircraft emergency with forward flight or in a stationary hover? And almost all the aircraft emergencies, you would rather have it in forward flight. I mean, if you engine failure, hydraulic failure, FADEC failure, any of these types of things, the aircraft performs better. It's more controllable. You're getting the same result for less power, and the load just flies more stable. So I'm a big fan of it. But to be honest, most a lot of the hoisting that you'll do that involves terrain, it's going to be a combination of the two, right? It's, you know, the hoist starts as static, but at some point you have to stop. So like a good example of that is you're hoisting down into 50-foot trees. You know, you can start it dynamically, but at some point you have to stop into a pocket and do a more of a static hoist. And the same thing with an extraction on the way out. It's a little bit more static initially, and as soon as you clear the tree line, then it becomes dynamic. So yeah, but I'm a huge fan of dynamic hoisting. You have a good one there? You're like laughing. Or are you just
I am kind of laughing. So Manny, I'm going to ask you a question right now. The question is, so is it okay to put pineapple on pepperoni pizza? Asking for a friend. So the answer is yes, because that is freaking delicious. Okay, one of my favorite pizzas. Right? Add a little jalapeno, it makes it even better.
It has nothing to do with hoisting, but that's funny.
Not a thing.
So somebody else said, do you know if there's a hoist manufacturer that doesn't have that forward flight limit with a live load for the Boeing, for the Bell 407? Unfortunately, no. Specific to the 407, there is not. So the 407, it's the Breeze Eastern hoist. It actually has a smaller cable that's much shorter. You're limited to about 110 feet. It's just that's the hoist that's available for that aircraft. So if you're flying the 407, you're kind of limited to that hoist. You know, it kind of is what it is. We've actually had some discussions with the guys at Breeze about it, and you know, they're aware of it. You know, let's be honest, you look at what goes into certification of an aircraft or a hoist, man, it's a big deal. It's a lot of time and money and effort to make changes like that. And really, you know, I kind of understand, you know, from looking at it from their perspective, why it really wouldn't be cost effective to go down that rabbit hole. But again, just know that when it's an actual emergency, that's a different situation. But you know, it's just a limitation that you have to stay within. So right now, specific to the 407, no, there's not. You can't, you know, get a different model of hoist and attach it to the aircraft and not have that limitation. So I hope that answers your question. I say let's do one more question and then maybe we wrap this up, Quinny.
Sure. Let's see. There's actually a big point made by Byron about the importance of gripping the cable. Yeah, we don't want to grab the cable, because if you're going in a counterclockwise, you'll actually unravel the cable all the way up. So good point on that. I just want to shout out to that. Another question: is the same method for emergencies for areas of ravines and streams with big cliffs? So this is where we go back to that briefing. So if you're coming into an area of a ravine, a cliff, or some spot of a tight area, you have to have an exit brief. No matter what, you have to have an exit brief. It just so happens you're going to add, like, okay, what if we have a hoisting emergency? How are we going to depart, and what are we going to do? That's what that comes down to. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, as far as you know, if there's a difference, you know, if you think about it, the helicopter and the load do not know if you're over water, if you're in a canyon. You know, they just react the way they react. So you know, generally the procedure is the same, but what you do is going to potentially change based on terrain, especially like the example we gave with the canyon. But otherwise, no, the physics behind it remain the same. Doesn't matter what you're flying over, day, night. Doesn't matter. And hey, hats off to who pointed out that thing about the cable. Yeah, because the worst thing you can do in that screwing is reach up and grab that thing, because you'll start to unravel the cable.
You know what, Dave? If you don't mind, I might keep going. We got some good questions here. Is that cool? So if everybody's still, if you guys are here and we haven't answered your question, I'm going to keep going. So let's see. So yes, the webinar will be available for recording. Is there any certification being provided for CEU purposes? Actually, no, because you don't actually need it for this. Now, let me bite my tongue on that for a minute. Depending on where you are in the world, some of the certifications are based on a little bit different between YASA, between FAA, between the Australia, New Zealand, GACA. Like, they all have their own little requirements. So no, you don't get CE hours for this, but it's excellent training. Dave, I can see you want to say something. Hit it.
No, well, just the one thing I would say is it's a good point, but between the different aviation authorities across the world, there are some pretty big differences. And you know, we've talked about this before at the Goodrich conference a few years ago in Anaheim. You know, in the United States, there's a lot more flexibility under the public use regulation. You know, and I always kind of joke, you know, when you mentioned the FAA's public use clause, over in Europe or even in Canada, and it's kind of a bit of a dirty word, to some folks, but there are some big differences, especially when it's, talking about certification of gear and things like that for live load hoisting. So yeah, I mean, most of what we were talking about was kind of specific to the United States, but I think generally everything we discussed is kind of everywhere across the planet. It's all the same. There was another one that we saw. Oh, do you have TTPs for tagline operators? For example, if you need them to break away the tagline with the load extended and you need to fly away for an aircraft emergency. So like, I think, are you asking, do we have specific procedures in place for that? We do. But what I would say is if you want to shoot us an email, if you have questions and there's stuff that we can help with when it comes to that, just give us a shout. I always tell people, they laugh, but I was like, we're not an attorney's office. We're not going to bill you by the hour. When people reach out to us and they want a little bit of help, we're happy to help. So if you have questions about maybe introducing checklists or procedures like that specifically, yeah, shoot us an email and we're happy to get in touch with you and help you develop some of those procedures if you don't have them. You got any others, Quinny?
Yeah, we just got a couple more. So Joe, let's see, I know this has been addressed in a few of the podcasts, but was one piece of advice from each of you for someone for those of us who are not yet involved in hoist operations, but are looking to get into it. So if you're looking to get into hoist operations, there are a couple things you can do. First of all, you got to find a spot, somebody that does it. Most of them that I've seen are outside of civilian world. Dave, I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, Dave, but most of the ones I've seen are police, fire, military, something like that. There are very few civilian side that get into it. I know Two Bear Air does. I know Bristow does. Let's see, Starflight, a couple of those get into hoisting. You got to go overseas. There's a couple of spots overseas, but
yeah, we've provided training for some private companies as well. It's not as common, definitely when you see hoist operations, it's generally going to be police, fire, military is who you're generally seeing. But yeah, there are some private companies out there, and again, when you're talking about in the United States, the regulations for private companies that are not able to, in a lot of situations, fall under that public use clause. It is a much bigger process to go through the 133 certification for Class D loads is what the FAA is going to require in the United States, at least. So a lot more strict when it comes to the harnesses, the gear, your procedures that are in place, the ability to hover on a single engine in a twin, all these things. But yeah, it is feasible. It's just not as common, I would say.
Yeah. Some of the other ones you can probably get into with hoisting. I know they do it up in the North Sea out of Germany. They do hoisting down to some of the wind farms and whatnot. They hoist the guys down there. Harbor pilots, if you get into something like that, they have out in Astoria, Oregon, they hoist harbor pilots over there. I know I've done it out in Saudi Arabia. So again, it depends on where you're looking. I've been up to Canada. I don't think they're doing it in Canada anymore, but I did some training up there. That's where I met Rob Monday, actually, and we were doing some harbor pilot hoist training up there. So there are ways. You have to go kind of search for it. And if you're looking for something specific, like where you live, just send us an email and we'll see if we can connect you for sure.
Here's another good
Steph,
one.
thanks for that's a government job, not private. Thanks, Steph. That's Starflight.
Yep.
Go ahead, Dave.
From Ian Williams, what do you think is the ideal braking strength for a weak link? That's a great question. And one thing I will tell you is, if you've never done this with whatever your weak links that you're using is, you can find out if you get like a load test cell, like a load meter. We've done this before where you hook it up and you actually pull it until it breaks. A lot of what we're using is right around 90 pounds is what we're finding is when it breaks. And again, it's kind of a sweet spot because what are we looking for? Well, the thing needs to be able to break. If it's 500 pounds, that's way too hard for that thing to snag, or for a person needs to be able to pull it and pop it. A regularly, an average person needs to be able to pull that thing and break it. But if it's, 10 pounds, that thing's going to break. A tagline attendant cannot put enough, a little bit of pressure on that thing before it's going to break. But yeah, what we found is right in that realm of around 90 pounds when we normally test them and kind of find the sweet spot for us. That's a good ballpark figure. But again, don't hold us to it. But that's right. Kind of that realm range is a good braking strength for it.
Yeah, I like about 100 to 150, maybe 200 pounds, depending on the size of the victim or the size of the load. And again, for me, putting tension on the tagline is an RS. My job is to put the brakes on. So if you can imagine driving 90 miles an hour down the road, instead of hitting the brakes and you're slowing it down. You hit the brakes nice and smooth and come into that controlled stop. It's the same thing with the tagline. Your hands are on the tagline to create that slow, controlled movement to keep that load plumb for the hoist operator. So again, your job on the ground is to help the guy in the air.
So you got a great.
I got one more from Tom. Have you guys looked into any of the anti-spin litter made by Versa Aerospace, and thoughts on this? So it's a piece of equipment, and depending on the aircraft, it may work well and it may not. I don't know. I have not personally used it. I've seen it at HAI at the Heli Expo. Dave, do you have experience with it personally?
You know, we haven't used it. We spoke with the people over at Vita Inclinita at some of the conferences, but yeah, we've never used it. The folks that I do know that have tried it are friends up at Two Bear. I know they did a T&E session with it. So, you know, honestly, like I'm not in a position to comment on it, because I think it would be unfair to that company for us to comment on something that we haven't had our hands on and actually get to go out and use. So what I would say is, if you're interested in it, they're usually really good about showing up at the conferences. I know they're going to be at HAI here at the next one in Atlanta. So, you know, if you have questions, you know, talk to them specifically or reach out to them. And you know, if what I will say is this: if we ever do end up using one on one of our classes or something like that, we're happy to provide feedback for everybody. Great question from Corinne Smith here. Well, I love the pilot questions, right? So this is a good one. Writing hovering auto rotation considerations and techniques with the load on the cable. Man.
All right, Dave, I got this. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have this. I'm not a pilot.
Well,
I hope everybody else is laughing. All right.
One of the things I'm really stoked about is to be able to provide, you know, pilot content, because it's just lacking out there. You know, the pilots just get left out, and it's such a critical part of it. But this is one of the many things that we talk about when we're doing our hoist training classes, when we get into the EPs. You know, we talk about it in singles and we talk about it in twins, but you know, when you're talking about flying, especially a single, like I have a lot of experience hoisting in the Huey, man, at altitude, and that was always a thing. Like, so when we get into that on our checklist and we get to aircraft power loss intentions, what are you going to do if you get either a partial power loss or a complete power loss? And you know, okay, we are going to have to do basically a hover and auto rotation. And you know, you've got, say, 100-foot hoist and the load is 50 feet below the skid. Man, that is an absolute worst case scenario, but it could happen. So what I would say is just some basic considerations. And again, we're going to get into these types of topics in future webinars, but just some basic things to consider. Again, pre-briefing and planning. In the pilot's mind, a lot of times I will tell the crew in the back when we get to that point on our checklist, I'll say aircraft power loss intentions. If I'm flying the Huey, it's like, it's pretty obvious we're not going to stay in a hover, but I tell them, like, hey, it's going to be a forward and left, and I'm going to try to put it down right there in that clearing. And if they're not sure, I might, you know, hey, you see that dead tree? We're going to go right there. If I can get it down past that rock, that's where I'm going to get it. But they know in the single, like, we're going down. So they're going to know at some point if they're going to potentially have to you know, cut the cable, shear the cable. Again, this is all specific to the aircraft that you're flying, whether or not the hoist operator has the ability to cut it ballistically, what type of manual cutting device you have back there, all more stuff that we're going to cover in future webinars. But for the pilot specific, my biggest thing is I want to try to save as many people as possible. And you got to figure that the load below you, if you go straight down, you're coming down on top of that aircraft. So ideally, if I can get the aircraft down and away from the people on the ground, and if you're hoisting a litter, there's more than likely more people down there. You're probably going to have your tagline attendant on, you know, in the case of the Huey, the right side of the helicopter, so the tagline can be extended out to maybe like the 3 o'clock position. So I'm in that situation trying to go kind of forward and left if I can. Now, if it's, you know, back or wherever the ideal place to try to get that aircraft down is, that's what I'm thinking, but I don't want to go straight down. Obviously, with a hovering auto, any forward airspeed I can get across the rotor system is going to give me a little bit more pull collective, which is going to help tremendously. But I just want to try to get the aircraft away from everybody and down in a clear spot, and ideally a distance further enough away to get them outside the rotor system, because you know, you got to I mean, let's just be honest. Like I've been in a helicopter accident before and a total engine failure, and it's ugly. So, you know, rotor blades are going to come flapping down. You know, tail rotor is going to come off. Drive shafts are going to shear. The further away you can get that aircraft from the people on the ground, the better it's going to be for everybody. You know, ideally, you try to make it survivable for the crew. But this is also another thing where you need to consider when we talk about your hoist plan, the hoist height. You know, it's a consideration, and it's a total picture thing when you're trying to. I always talk about, like, Quinny's the hoist operator. He has his wants and needs, and I have my wants and needs. And a lot of the time, we're just trying to meet in the middle. You know, but that's the biggest thing, is have a plan, because again, if we're sitting up there in a sim, or just you and I go up, you know, in a 407 and we're in a stationary hover at 100 feet and I chop the throttle on you, if you haven't at least thought about what your response is going to be, it's lag time that you don't want. That lag time is going to kill you, because that even that 1 or 2 seconds of a high collective setting, high you know, pitch setting of the rotor blades, your rotor RPM is going to be going away rapidly. So if you just have in your mind, okay, hey, when you get to that point in the checklist, power loss intentions, okay, if I get a power loss, I'm low on collective, I'm going to go forward and left and down, I'm going to try to put it right there. As soon as that thing happens, you just react. And that extra second could be the difference in rotor RPM that makes a survivable accident or a completely unsurvivable accident. So again, love to talk about that more in depth, but future classes for pilots.
Yep.
I think that's
I
it.
think that's all of them.
We covered
Hey,
them
you're
all.
welcome. Happy to answer the question.
Yeah.
We look forward to having you guys back. We're gonna do this some more. So if we didn't answer a question, or you have further questions later on, please send us an email. We'll get back to you, and we'll get stuff going for you. So cool.
Yep. So with that,
Well,
again,
Mr. Dave Cowan.
yeah, Quinny, thank you. You're an excellent partner. You're an excellent training partner. Thank you for everybody that attended. Again, look forward to having you attend more of these in the future. Keep an eye out. We're going to send notifications out. We are not going to spam you with crazy stuff in your inbox, but if you get an email from us regarding future webinars, that's all it's going to be. You can go to therealrescue.com. You can go to sr3rescue.com. There's webinar tabs. So for future classes, it's going to be on there as well if you're interested. And follow us on the social media, because we're already making announcements. So again, thank you so much for attending. Train hard and fly safe.
Booyah!